The rifle shot echoed across the desert as Evangeline Whitmore stumbled through the thorny mesquite, her torn wedding dress catching on every branch. Blood trickled from the gash above her left eye where Josiah's fist had connected mere hours ago. Behind her, the thundering hooves of his horse grew closer. Accompanied by the savage curses of the man she'd foolishly married 6 months prior. "You can't hide from me forever, you worthless wretch." Josiah's voice carried on the wind like a death sentence. Her bare feet found purchase on the rocky ground as she scrambled up a steep embankment, her lungs burning with each desperate breath. The Arizona Territory stretched endlessly before her, a wasteland of red rock and unforgiving sun. No water, no food, no hope, only the driving need to escape the monster she'd wed. Josiah Whitmore owned half of Copper Creek, the ramshackle mining town where her father had sold her like cattle to settle his gambling debts. What the townspeople saw as a respectable businessman, Evangeline knew as a brute who delighted in her pain. The bruises hidden beneath her sleeves told stories she dared not speak aloud. The sound of hooves stopped abruptly. Evangeline pressed herself against a boulder, her heart hammering so violently she feared it might give her away. Through a gap in the rocks, she glimpsed Josiah dismounting, his weathered face twisted with rage. His gray beard was matted with tobacco stains, and his pale eyes held the cold fury of a man whose property had dared to run. "I know you're out there, Evangeline," he called, drawing his Colt revolver. "Come back now and I'll only break one arm. Make me search for you, and you'll wish you'd never been born." She squeezed her eyes shut, remembering the last time he'd made such a promise. Her ribs still ached from that particular lesson about a wife's obedience. The desert wind whipped her auburn hair across her face as she fought back tears. Death in this wasteland might be kinder than returning to Josiah's tender mercies. A shadow fell across her hiding spot. She looked up to see a figure silhouetted against the blazing suntall, broad-shouldered, moving with the fluid grace of a mountain cat. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized this was no white man. The newcomer's long black hair was adorned with eagle feathers, his bronze skin marked with paint that spoke of war and ceremony. An Apache warrior stood between her and her hunter. The warrior's dark eyes met hers for a heartbeat. And she saw something unexpected there, not the savage bloodlust the townspeople whispered about, a deep, quiet intelligence. He pressed a finger to his lips, then melted back into the rocks as silently as he'd appeared. "Where are you, you ungrateful bitch?" Josiah's voice cracked like a whip. Evangeline heard the soft whistle of an arrow, followed by a strangled cry. When she dared to peer around the boulder, Josiah lay crumpled beside his horse, clutching his shoulder where the arrow had found its mark. The Apache warrior emerged from the shadows like an avenging spirit, his bow still drawn. "Leave this place," the warrior commanded in accented English, his voice carrying the weight of mountains. "Do not return, or the next arrow finds your heart." Josiah Whitmore writhed in the dust, his face contorted with pain and disbelief. "You red devil? That's my wife you're protecting?" The Apache warrior, whose name Evangeline would later learn was Ayana, meaning eternal blossom, stepped closer to the wounded man. His presence seemed to fill the desert, commanding and terrible in its quiet power. The eagle feathers in his hair caught the wind as he notched another arrow. "Your wife?" Ayana's dark eyes flicked to Evangeline's bruised face, taking in the split lip, the swollen cheek, the fear that radiated from her like heat from sun-baked stone. A man who marks his woman like a dog marks territory has no claim to her. Evangeline pressed herself deeper into the shadows, torn between terror and fascination. She had been raised on stories of Apache savagery, tales designed to keep white women cowering behind locked doors. Yet this warrior's eyes held more honor than she'd seen in any civilized man. Josiah struggled to his feet, his left arm hanging useless at his side. "The territorial governor will hear about this. There's a bounty on Apache scalps, and yours. We'll fetch a pretty price. Many have tried to claim that bounty," Ayana replied with deadly calm. "Their bones bleach in the desert sun." The truth of his words settled over them like a shroud. Even wounded, even outnumbered by civilization's might, this Apache warrior radiated a lethal confidence that made Josiah's bluster ring hollow. The man who terrorized Evangeline behind closed doors suddenly seemed small and pitiful before this force of nature. "Take your horse and go," Ayana commanded, his bow never wavering. "Ride back to your town of lies and tell them the woman is dead. Tell them the desert claimed her, or the Apaches took her. I care not what story you spin, but if you speak the truth of this day, if you bring others to seek her, I will visit you in the dark of night. Your death will not be swift." Josiah's face had gone the color of old parchment. He mounted his horse with clumsy, paniddled movements, cradling his wounded arm. "This isn't over," he snarled, but the threat lacked conviction. "For you it is," Ayana replied. "Forget this place, forget this woman. Find another to torment. If you must, but know that the eyes of the desert are always watching." The sound of hooves faded into the distance, leaving only the whisper of wind through stone and the thundering of Evangeline's heart. She remained frozen against the boulder, unsure whether her salvation had just arrived or if she'd merely traded one captor for another. Ayana lowered his bow and turned to face her fully. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 25 to her 22 years. His face was striking high cheekbones, a strong jaw, eyes like polished obsidian. Paint adorned his forehead in symbols she couldn't read, and a leather cord around his neck held what appeared to be a small piece of turquoise. "You are hurt," he observed, his English careful but clear. Evangeline touched the cut above her eye, feeling the dried blood crack under her fingertips. Yes, but I'll live. Will you?" He studied her torn dress, her bare feet, the desperation that clung to her like dust. The desert kills the unprepared quickly. You have no water, no food, no protection from the sun or the cold night to come. The reality of her situation crashed over her like a flash flood. In her desperation to escape Josiah, she'd fled into the wilderness with nothing but the clothes on her back. She was hundreds of miles from any settlement that might welcome a white woman, and even then, word of her flight would spread. Josiah's story would be believed over hers, the hysterical wife who'd abandoned her Christian duty. "Why did you help me?" Her voice barely above a whisper. Ayana was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. "My mother was taken by white men when I was a child, sold like a horse to a trader who worked her to death in his fields. I swore then that no woman would suffer such fate if I could prevent it." The simple honesty of his words struck her like lightning. Here was a man who understood her plight, not from books or sermons, but from the marrow of his bones. The civilized men of Copper Creek would have demanded to know what she'd done to deserve Josiah's fists. This Apache warrior simply accepted that her suffering was reason enough to act. What happens now? Ayana shouldered his bow and gestured toward the deeper desert. "Now you must choose. Return to your people and the fate they have arranged for you, or trust in the mercy of the wilderness." "And you?" The question escaped before she could stop. His eyes met hers, and she saw something kindle their spark that made her pulse quicken for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. "I know a place where the desert keeps its secrets," he said, "where running water sings among the stones, and the old gods still watch over those who honor them. It is far from the white man's roads, hidden from his maps. You would be safe there. Safe." The word was a prayer she'd forgotten how to speak. Evangeline's decision came, not from her mind, but from the deeper well of her spirit, the part of her that Josiah had tried so hard to break. "I'll come with you," she whispered, and the words felt like the first true thing she'd spoken in months. Ayana nodded as though he'd expected this answer. From a leather pouch at his side, he produced a pair of moccasins, worn but serviceable. "Your feet will not survive the journey barefoot," he said, kneeling to examine the cuts and scratches she'd already accumulated. His touch was gentle as he helped her into the soft leather shoes, so different from Josiah's brutal hands that she had to blink back tears. When had anyone last shown her such simple kindness? "We travel by night," Ayana explained, rising to his feet. "The sun is too merciless in the day, and your people will expect us to move in daylight. We rest during the heat and become one with the shadows when darkness falls." He led her to a narrow crevice in the rock face, hidden from casual view. The space was cool and dry, carved by centuries of wind and rain into a natural shelter. Someone had been here before she could see the remains of old fires, bits of pottery that spoke of ancient occupation.
Oh.
This place is sacred to my people, Ayana said, settling cross-legged on the stone floor. It is where the spirits of the desert come to rest between journeys. No harm can befall you here. Evangeline sank down opposite him, her torn dress pooling around her like the petals of a crushed flower. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but weighted with the magnitude of what she'd chosen. She was now completely dependent on this man, this Apache warrior, who had appeared like something from a fever dream. "What is your name?" she asked. "Among my people, I am called Ayana, Eternal Blossom. Oh. The whites at the fort know me as something else, something they can pronounce." With their thick tongues, his mouth curved in what might have been amusement. "What do they call you, beyond the title wife? Evangeline?" The name felt strange on her lips, as if she were reclaiming something long lost. "Evangeline Morrison, Whitmore." She grimaced, "though I suppose that name means nothing now." "Names have power," Ayana said seriously. "They shape us, define us, bind us to our fate. Perhaps it is time you chose a new one." The suggestion was radical, even blasphemous by the standards of her upbringing. A woman's name was given by her father and claimed by her husband. She had no right to choose her own identity, yet sitting in this ancient place, protected by a man who owed her nothing, the idea bloomed in her chest like hope. "The sun grows fierce," Ayana observed, glancing toward the cave mouth where heat shimmers danced in the air. "Rest now. The stars emerge, we begin the true journey." Evangeline tried to sleep, but her body was too accustomed to vigilance. For months, she'd trained herself to wake at Josiah's footstep, to recognize the particular quality of silence that preceded his rages. Now, in this place of supposed safety, her nerves sang with tension. Ayana seemed to sense her distress. "Tell me of your life before," he said quietly. "Before the man who hurt you." So she did. She spoke of her childhood in Missouri, of her father's gradual descent into gambling and drink after her mother's death from consumption. She told him about the long journey west, the promises of prosperity that turned to dust in the desert heat. She described the day her father had shaken hands with Josiah Whitmore over a bottle of rot-gut whiskey, selling her future to pay his debts. "I thought marriage would be sanctuary," she whispered. "I thought any man would be better than watching Papa destroy himself drink by drink, and instead, you found another kind of prison." The word was heavy with 6 months of accumulated pain. "He told me I was lucky to have him, that no other man would want damaged goods like me," he said. He said terrible things. Ayana was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old sorrow. "My people have a saying, 'The wounded deer teaches others where the wolves hunt.' Your pain has taught you wisdom that many never learn. What wisdom is that? That a person's true nature is revealed not in their words but in how they treat those who cannot fight back." His eyes met hers across the shadowed space. "A man who would strike a woman has the heart of a coward, no matter how others may fear him." The simple validation of what she'd known but never dared voice broke something loose in her chest. She wept then, quietly, but deeply, mourning not just for her own suffering but for the girl she'd been before. Josiah's fists taught her to flinch at unexpected sounds. When her tears were spent, she found Ayana watching her with something that might have been admiration. "You're stronger than you know," he said. "It takes great courage to flee into the unknown, rather than accept certain misery." "I don't feel strong," she admitted. "Fear and courage are not opposites," Ayana replied. "They are companions. The brave person is not one who feels no fear, but one who acts in spite of it." As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of coral and gold, Evangeline felt something shift inside her. For the first time since her wedding day, she was not counting the hours until the next blow would fall. For the first time in months, she was choosing her own path. The desert night was calling, and she would answer. When the last light faded from the sky, Iana rose with fluid grace. The transformation was remarkable. In daylight. He had seemed merely a man, albeit a striking one. But in the darkness, he became something more primal, a creature perfectly adapted to this harsh landscape. "Stay close," he murmured, his voice barely louder than the wind. "Step where I step." The desert forgives few mistakes. They emerged from the cave into a world transformed. Without the sun's brutal glare, the desert revealed its hidden beauty. Stars blazed overhead in multitudes that shamed the feeble gaslights of Copper Creek. The air, scorching mere hours ago, carried a coolness that kissed Evangeline's bruised skin like a blessing. Iana moved with the silent confidence of a shadow-given form. His moccasined feet found purchase on loose stone without disturbing so much as a pebble. Evangeline, despite her best efforts, felt clumsy behind him, her borrowed footwear sliding on surfaces that seemed solid enough but shifted treacherously under her weight. "The desert is alive," Iana said softly as they walked out. "It watches, it remembers. Those who fight against it die quickly. Those who learn to move with it, to become part of its rhythm, can travel its length without leaving a trace." They walked for hours through landscapes that defied imagination. Towering saguaro cacti stood like ancient sentinels, their arms raised in permanent supplication to the star-drunk sky. Strange rock formations thrust up from the earth like the spines of sleeping dragons. In the distance, mountains loomed black. Against the heavens, their peaks crowned with snow that seemed impossible in this land of fire. When they paused to rest beside a natural water tank carved into the stone, Evangeline marveled at how Iana had known it would be there. The water was cool and sweet, tasting of minerals and ancient rain. "How do you know where to find water?" she asked, cupping the precious liquid in her palms. "The desert tells those who listen," he replied, refilling a leather water bag with practiced efficiency. "See how the stone is stained here? How certain plants grow in this place but not 20 feet away. The land speaks constantly. White men simply refuse to hear." They resumed their journey, and gradually Evangeline began to understand what he meant. The desert was not the dead wasteland she'd imagined, but a complex ecosystem of subtle signs and hidden bounty. Iana showed her which cacti held water in their flesh, which rocks collected dew in the pre-dawn hours, which animal trails led to hidden springs. "My people have walked these paths for countless generations," he explained as they navigated. A narrow canyon where the walls seemed to lean inward, like conspirators sharing secrets. Before your Spanish conquistadors, before your American settlers, before any white foot touched this soil, we were here. But loving to her children? "Where are we going exactly?" Evangeline asked. The question had been burning in her mind for hours. Iana paused at the mouth of the canyon, studying the way ahead, with eyes that seemed to gather every photon of available light. "There is a place. It's difficult to find, difficult to reach. A hidden valley where water runs year-round and the old spirits still hold sway. My grandfather's grandfather spoke of it in the stories passed down from the ancient ones. Few living souls know of its existence. You trust me with such a secret?" The implications weren't lost on her. If she ever returned to civilization, this knowledge could lead armies to what sounded like an Apache stronghold. He turned to face her fully, his expression serious in the starlight. "Trust is a river that flows both ways," he said. "You have placed your life in my hands. How can I do less than offer the same faith in return?" The simple profundity of his words struck her speechless. In all her 22 years, no man had ever spoken to her of trust as something to be given freely, rather than demanded as tribute. Josiah had required her submission, her father her obedience. The preacher, her silent acceptance of whatever fate men decreed for her. Iana offered something unprecedented, respect between equals. They climbed higher as the night progressed, following paths that seemed invisible until they were already upon them. The air grew thinner and cooler, scented with pine and juniper. Strange night sounds echoed off the canyon walls, the hunting cry of an owl, the distant howl of coyotes, the rustle of small creatures going about their nocturnal business. "Are you not afraid?" Evangeline asked during another brief rest. Traveling with a white woman? Your people found us together? Some would question my judgment, Ayana admitted. Others would understand that the heart chooses its own path, regardless of the color of skin or the accident of birth. He was quiet for a moment, then added, What of you? Do you fear what lies ahead more than what you left behind? Evangeline considered the question seriously. Behind her lay Josiah's fists, the suffocating weight of a life chosen for her by men who saw her as property. Ahead waited the unknown danger, certainly, but also possibility. For the first time in her adult life, she was choosing her own destiny. I'm terrified, she said honestly, but I've never felt more alive. Ayana's smile was visible even in the darkness, and you begin to understand what freedom truly means. As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky in shades of pearl and rose, they reached what appeared to be an impasse, sheer rock wall rising hundreds of feet into the morning air. But Ayana led her to what seemed like merely a crack in the stone, barely wide enough for a single person. Beyond it, the sound of falling water whispered like a promise. Welcome, he said, to the place the desert keeps for those it has chosen to save. The passage through the rock was a birth canal of stone, narrow and winding, requiring them to move single file through darkness, so complete it seemed solid. Evangeline's heart hammered against her ribs as the walls pressed close on either side, but Ayana's steady presence ahead of her served as an anchor in the claustrophobic space. Then, suddenly, they emerged into paradise. The hidden valley spread before them like something from a fever dream of Eden. A waterfall tumbled from impossible heights, feeding a clear pool that reflected the morning sky like polished silver. Ancient cottonwoods lined the banks, their leaves whispering secrets to the wind. Grass, actual grass, green and lush carpeted areas that should have been barren stone. The air itself felt different here, charged with moisture and the electric promise of growing things. This cannot be real, Evangeline breathed, turning in a slow circle to take in the impossible beauty surrounding them. The old ones called it Sayahade, a place where water sings, Ayana said, setting down his pack beside the pool. It exists in the spaces between worlds, hidden from those who would exploit its magic. Evangeline knelt beside the water, hardly daring to touch its surface, lest the mirage dissolve. But it was real cool and sweet when she cupped it to her lips, singing as it flowed over the smooth stones of its bed. Fish moved in its depths like living jewels, and she could see clear to the sandy bottom, even in its deepest parts. How is this possible, she asked. We're in the desert. It should be impossible. Ayana settled beside her, his reflection joining hers in the still water. There are places in this world where the normal rules do not apply, where the spirits of earth and water have made their own agreements, regardless of what mortals think should be. He gestured to the walls that enclosed them. The stone here is special. It holds water like a vast bowl, collecting rain and snow melt from 1,000 secret places, keeping it safe and cool even when the desert burns. As the morning progressed, the valley revealed more of its secrets. There were caves in the canyon walls, some small and intimate, others vast as cathedrals. Ancient pictographs adorned certain walls, spirals and human figures. Animals both familiar and strange, symbols that seemed to shift and dance when viewed from the corner of the eye. My people have used this place for ceremonies since the beginning of memory, Ayana explained as he showed her a cave fitted with natural shelves and alcoves. Vision quests, healing rituals, marriages blessed by the old spirits. It is a place where the veil between worlds grows thin. The cave he'd chosen for their shelter was perfect for two people, large enough to be comfortable, small enough to be warmed by a single small fire. Someone had lived here before. The walls were blackened with old smoke, and sleeping areas had been carved into the living rock. A natural chimney drew smoke up and away, dispersing it so completely that no trace would be visible from outside the valley. You'll be safe here while I hunt, Ayana said, arranging his gear with the methodical precision of a man accustomed to living off the land. The entrance we used is the only way in or out. Even if someone found it by chance, the passage is Lee defended by one person with a bow. Hunt? Evangeline felt a flutter of panic. You're leaving? He paused in his preparations, studying her face. "We need food, and I need to obscure our trail. Your husband may have accepted my warning, but white men have short memories and long grudges. It's better to be certain." The thought of being alone in this impossible place filled her with dread, but she forced herself to nod. She'd chosen this path. She couldn't cling to her protector like a helpless child. "There are things you should know," Ayanna continued. "Rules that keep this place safe. Never foul the water it is sacred, the lifeblood of the valley. Take only what you need of its gifts, and always give something back. Show respect to the pictographs, but do not touch them with your hands. And if you see unusual things, do not be afraid. The spirits here are old, but not malevolent." Unusual things? Lights that have no source? Voices that speak in tongues older than memory? Shadows that move independently of their casters? Ayanna's expression was serious. "This is a place of power, Evangeline. Will test you as it tests all who shelter here. But if your heart is true, you have nothing to fear." He left at midday, disappearing through the stone passage like a ghost made of desert wind and shadow. Alone for the first time since her flight, Evangeline allowed herself to truly examine her situation. She was hundreds of miles from civilization, dependent on a man she'd known for barely a day, hiding in a place that shouldn't exist. By every rational measure, she should be terrified. Instead, she felt peaceful. For the first time in months, she wasn't afraid of the next moment, the next hour, the next day. Whatever dangers this place might hold, they were honest dangers, the clean threat of wild things rather than the sick cruelty of a man who should have protected her. She spent the afternoon exploring the valley, marveling at its hidden wonders. There were fruit trees, some bearing varieties she recognized, others completely alien. Berry bushes heavy with sweet dark fruit. Herbs that filled the air with fragrances both familiar and exotic. It was as if some benevolent god had gathered the best of many ecosystems and woven them together in this secret garden. As evening approached, she made a small fire using techniques Ayanna had shown her, not the violent striking of matches she was accustomed to, but the patient coaxing of flame from tinder and ember. The skill felt good in her hands. Another step away from helplessness toward self-sufficiency. That's when she first noticed the lights. They began as subtle glimmers at the edge of her vision, so faint she thought she might be imagining them. But as full darkness settled over the valley, they grew brighter and more distinct orbs of soft radiance that danced among the trees like oversized fireflies. They cast no shadows, made no sound, and seemed to pulse with a rhythm that matched her own heartbeat. One drifted closer to her cave, hovering just outside the firelight. It was beautiful rather than frightening, a pearl of luminescence that seemed to regard her with benevolent curiosity. Without thinking, she extended her hand toward it. The moment her fingers touched its surface, the world exploded into vision. The light engulfed Evangeline like warm honey, and suddenly she was no longer sitting by her small fire, but standing in the same valley as it had been countless years before. The trees were different, younger in some places, ancient giants in others. The waterfall sang a different song, higher and more complex. And everywhere there were people. Not white settlers or even the Apache she'd come to know through Ayanna, but something older. These people moved with a grace that spoke of perfect harmony with their environment. Their skin was copper-touched by sun and wind, their hair adorned with feathers and shells from distant seas. They wore clothing that seemed woven from starlight and shadow. Their eyes held depths that spoke of wisdom accumulated over millennia. One of them, an elderly woman, whose face was marked with intricate tattoos, approached Evangeline with a smile that transcended all barriers of time and culture. When she spoke, her words bypassed the ears entirely and resonated directly in the soul. "You are welcome here, daughter of sorrow. We have been waiting for you." "Waiting for me?" Evangeline's voice seemed to come from very far away. "But I don't understand. Who are you?" "We are the guardians of this place, the keepers of its secrets. Before your people came, before the Apache learned our songs, we walked between the worlds and tended the sacred spaces. How we exist in the spaces between heartbeats. In the pause between one breath and the next, the ancient woman gestured, and the vision shifted. Now Evangeline saw the valley as it existed in her own time, but overlaid with threads of light that connected everything, tree to stone, water to wind, the smallest insect to the wheeling stars above. It was a vast web of interconnection, pulsing with life and purpose. Every soul who finds sanctuary here adds their thread to the pattern. The Apache warrior who brought you here carries the golden strand of protector. Your thread is silver, the color of resilience refined by suffering. Does it mean? Evangeline asked, though she was beginning to understand. It means you are home, child. Not the home of your birth, or the prison of your marriage, but the home of your choosing. Here you may become who you were always meant to be, freed from the names and roles others have placed upon you. The vision shifted again, and now she saw herself, but not as she was. This other Evangeline moved with confidence, her back straight and her eyes clear. She wore clothing that was neither white woman's dress nor Apache garb, but something uniquely her own. Her hands, no longer soft from pampered idleness, were skilled and strong. Beside her walked Ayana, not as protector, but as partner. Their threads in the great web intertwining in patterns of impossible beauty. But the path to that future is not without trials, the ancient guardian warned. Your past will not release you easily. The man who claimed you will not forget, and others will come seeking what they believe is theirs to take. You must choose. Daughter, will you fight for your freedom, or will you allow fear to drive you back to familiar bondage? I'll fight, Evangeline said, without hesitation, surprising herself with the fierce certainty in her voice. I'd rather die free than live as a slave. The guardian smiled, and her approval felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Then accept our gifts, child of two worlds. Let the wisdom of stone and stream, wind and flame, become part of your spirit. Learn the old ways that your people have forgotten, and become the bridge between what was and what could be. The light began to fade, but not before Evangeline felt something fundamental shift inside her. It was as if locked doors in her mind had suddenly swung open, revealing rooms she'd never known existed. She could sense the life force of every plant and animal in the valley, feel the slow pulse of the earth beneath her feet, hear the whispered conversations of wind and water. When her vision cleared, she was back in her cave, the fire burning low before her. But she was no longer the same woman who had fled through the desert in a torn wedding dress. Something had awakened in her, something that made her feel both ancient and newly born. The mysterious lights still danced among the trees, but now she understood them for what they were, the spirits of this place, welcoming her into their eternal dance. She raised her hand in greeting, and they pulsed brighter in response, their blessing washing over her like benediction. When Ayana returned near dawn, carrying fresh game and wild plants for their sustenance, he stopped short at the cave entrance. His dark eyes studied her face with the intensity of a tracker reading sign. You have seen them, he said. Oh. The guardians? Yes. The words came easily, as if she'd been speaking of such things all her life. They showed me possibilities, futures that could be, if I have the courage to claim them. Ayana set down his pack and moved to kneel beside her. Up close, she could see that he too had changed during the night. There was a weight in his eyes that hadn't been there before, a burden of knowledge newly acquired. I felt the shift, he said quietly. The spirits of my ancestors came to me as I tracked through the desert. They spoke of prophecies older than memory, of a time when the barriers between peoples would dissolve and new paths would be born. His hand reached out to cup her cheek, his touch gentle as butterfly wings. They spoke of you, Evangeline. Of the woman who would choose love over fear, freedom over safety, truth over the comfortable lies of civilization. What did you tell them? She whispered, leaning into his touch. I told them what I had already known from the moment I first saw you hiding among the rocks, he replied. That I would follow you into any future you chose to create, stand beside you against any force that sought to drag you back into darkness. That my heart was yours if you wanted it, regardless of what our different worlds might think of such. A choice The declaration hung between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. Everything Evangeline had been taught about propriety, about the natural order of races and cultures, about the roles assigned to women by God and society, screamed against what she felt growing between them. But the wisdom the guardians had, awakened in her, whispered a different truth, that love, real love, recognized no boundaries save those erected by fear and prejudice. "I want it," she said, her voice steady, despite the magnitude of what she was accepting. "I want your heart, Ayanna. I want to walk whatever path we create together, regardless of who might try to stop us." When he kissed her, it was not with the brutal claiming she'd learned to expect from male desire, but with a reverence that spoke of sacred things. It was a kiss that sealed not just passion but partnership, not just desire but dedication to a shared dream of freedom. Neither of them noticed the lights that had begun to gather around the cave entrance, or the way they pulsed in rhythm with two hearts that had finally found their home in each other. The idyll could not last forever. Evangeline woke 3 weeks later to find Ayanna standing at the cave entrance, his body tense as a drawn bowstring. The morning light caught the grim set of his jaw as he studied something in the distance that she could not see. "What is it?" she asked, joining him at the mouth of the cave. "Smoke," he said grimly, pointing toward the eastern rim of the valley. 3 columns, evenly spaced. It's a signal. Evangeline's blood turned to ice water, then their weeks together. She had learned to read the desert's moods almost as well as Ayanna did. She knew that smoke in such a pattern was not accidental, it was communication. A message passed between watchers who had found something worth reporting. "Josiah," she whispered, "perhaps for the territorial militia. Your husband has had time to spin whatever story serves his purposes." Ayanna's hand moved instinctively to the knife at his belt. "The signals suggest at least a dozen men, possibly more. They found the entrance to the outer canyon." The peace that had settled over Evangeline like a healing balm these past weeks shattered like glass. She had known this moment would come, had felt it lurking at the edges of her newfound happiness, like a wolf circling a campfire. But knowing and experiencing were vastly different things. "How long before they find the passage?" she asked, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "The hidden entrance. Days, perhaps weeks, if they search without guidance. But if they have a tracker who knows Apache ways." He didn't need to finish. They both understood that their sanctuary had become a trap during their time in the hidden valley. Evangeline had changed in ways that went far beyond the golden tan the high desert sun had painted on her skin. The soft, frightened woman who had fled through the mesquite in a torn wedding dress was gone, replaced by someone harder, more resilient. Under Ayanna's patient tutelage, she had learned to track game, to identify edible plants, to read weather, patterns in the behavior of birds and insects. Her hands, once lily-white and useless, now bore the calluses of useful work. More importantly, her spirit had undergone its own transformation. The guardian's gift of sight had never fully faded. She could sense the life force of the valley around her, feel the slow pulse of the earth through her bare feet, hear the whispered warnings of wind through stone. This place had awakened something in her that civilization had tried to bury in. Ancient knowing that connected her to the web of all living things. "We could run," she said, though the words tasted like ash in her mouth. "Go deeper into the desert, find another hiding place." Ayanna shook his head. "Not we, beloved. I could run, I know, paths through the high country that would take me beyond their reach. But you." He turned to face her fully, and she saw the pain he was trying to hide. "You are not Apache. You cannot disappear into the desert as I can. Eventually, you would need supplies, medicine, contact with your own people. And they will be watching every settlement, every trading post, every place where a white woman might seek help." The terrible logic of his words settled over her like a burial shroud. She had chosen freedom, but freedom for a woman in this time. And place was a luxury that existed only in the margins, in the spaces between worlds. Now those margins were closing. "There is another way," Ayanna continued, his voice heavy with reluctance. "I could take you to my people, to the stronghold in the Dragoon Mountains where Nature leads the last free bands. You would be under their protection, safe from white man's law." She could hear the unspoken reservation in his tone. "But you would be forever changed. To live among the Apache, you would have to become Apache. Your old life, your old identity, would die completely. There could be no going back, no reconciliation with the world you came from." His dark eyes searched her face. "There would be those among my people who would never accept you, would see you always as the enemy, regardless of what you sacrificed to be among them." The choice he offered was stark. Become someone else entirely, or face whatever fate Josiah and his allies had planned for her. Neither option guaranteed happiness or even survival. But as she stood there in the morning light of their hidden paradise, feeling the pulse of the sacred valley beneath her feet, Evangeline realized that the most important choice had already been made. "I won't go back," she said with quiet finality. "Whatever the cost, I won't return to being his property." Ayana's relief was visible, though it warred with concern in his expression. "Then we prepare for visitors. The passage can be defended. It's narrow enough that one person with a bow can hold off a dozen. But if they bring dynamite, what would they?" The possibility hadn't occurred to her, but it made horrible sense. If Josiah had convinced the authorities that she'd been kidnapped by hostile Indians, they might be willing to blast through stone to reach her. White men solve many problems. With explosives, Ayana said grimly. "I owned you. Paid good money for you." "You never owned anything but fear," Evangeline replied, standing over him with her bow still drawn. "And that currency has no value here." She could have killed him then, one arrow through the heart, ending forever the threat he represented. But as she looked down at this broken remnant of a man, she felt only pity. He was already defeated in every way that mattered. Death would be a mercy he didn't deserve. "Go," she commanded. "Crawl back to your town and tell them what you found here. Tell them that some things cannot be bought, some people cannot be owned, and some places are too sacred to violate. Tell them that Evangeline Morrison died in the desert, and in her place stands someone they cannot touch." Josiah struggled to his feet, cradling his wounded arm. His eyes held a mixture of hatred and fear that would probably haunt his remaining days. But he turned and stumbled toward the passage, broken and defeated. As his footsteps faded in the stone throat of the canyon, Evangeline felt something shift in the very air around them. The Guardian's lights began to appear, even in the bright morning sun, dancing in celebration around the battlefield where sacred ground had been successfully defended. She turned to find Ayana watching her with an expression of wonder and pride. There was blood on his shirt where a bullet had grazed his ribs. But his eyes were bright with victory and something deeper, recognition of the warrior she had become. "It's finished," he said simply. "No," Evangeline replied, feeling the truth of her words in her bones. "It's just beginning." 6 months later, Evangeline stood at the edge of the hidden valley, watching the sunrise paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Her appearance had transformed completely from the pale, a frightened woman who had once fled through the mesquite. Her skin was bronzed by sun and wind, her hair adorned with feathers and small bones that marked her as someone who walked between worlds. The soft curves of pampered domesticity had been replaced by the lean strength of a woman who lived by her own skill and courage. Beside her, Ayana checked the packs that would carry them on their next journey. They were no longer refugees hiding from the past, but explorers setting out to build a future entirely of their own choosing. "Are ready," he reported, though his voice held a note of regret. Leaving the sacred valley would be like leaving Eden, but both of them knew it was time. The place had served its purpose, healing them, changing them, showing them what was possible when love and courage combined with ancient wisdom. "I'll miss this place," Evangeline said, though she felt excitement as much as sadness. It gave U.S. sanctuary when we needed it most. And now, it releases us to carry its gifts into the wider world. Ayana's hand found hers, her fingers intertwining with the easy familiarity of partners who had faced death together and chosen life. "The Guardian's blessings travel with us, beloved. Carry the valley's magic wherever we go." Their destination was the free territory beyond the reach of both American law and Apache politics. The vast wilderness where the borders of nations became meaningless and only personal honor mattered. There were others like them out there, people who had chosen to live outside the rigid categories civilization imposed. Together they would build something new. The past 6 months had brought visitors to their hidden sanctuary, but not the kind they had once feared. Word had spread through the underground networks that connected outcasts and refugees throughout the NT. Territory whispered stories of a place where the impossible became possible, where love conquered the artificial barriers of race and culture. They had come in ones and twos at first, a runaway slave seeking freedom, a Chinese prospector fleeing persecution, a Mexican woman escaping an arranged marriage. Each had found sanctuary in the sacred valley. Each had been changed by its ancient power. Some had stayed, forming the nucleus of a new kind of community. Others had moved on, carrying the valley's wisdom to new places and new people. Evangeline had become something unprecedented, a bridge between worlds. Equally at home with Apache wisdom and the practical knowledge of frontier survival, her guidance, the valley's refugees learned skills that transcended cultural boundaries: tracking and hunting, plant lore and weather reading, the arts of healing and harmony with the natural world. But more than skills, she taught them something revolutionary: that identity was a choice, not a chain. That the names and roles imposed by birth could be discarded like old clothes, replaced with something authentic and self-chosen. She had become living proof that transformation was possible. That people could indeed become who they were meant to be rather than what others expected them to be. "Are you certain about this?" Iana asked as they prepared to mount their horses. "Once we leave, there's no guarantee we can find our way back. The valley reveals itself only to those who need it most." Evangeline smiled, feeling the certainty. "In her bones, we'll return when the time is right. But now, our path leads elsewhere. There are others out there who need what we've learned, who are searching for the same freedom we found here." She turned for one last look at the waterfall that sang among the cottonwoods, at the cave that had sheltered their love through its first dangerous blooming, at the ancient pictographs that had witnessed their transformation from refugees to partners to something entirely new. The Guardians. Lights appeared one final time, dancing in the morning air like blessing made visible. In their pulsing radiance, Evangeline saw approval and something that looked remarkably like pride. She raised her hand in farewell, and the lights responded with a brilliance that made the sunrise seem pale by comparison. Then she turned her horse toward the passage that led to the outer world, and together she and Iana rode toward whatever future they would create together. Behind them, Hidden Valley settled back into its patient waiting, ready to offer sanctuary to the next. Souls who needed healing. But the story of the white woman, an Apache warrior who had found love in its sacred spaces, would live on in whispered legends, inspiring others to believe that freedom was possible, that love could indeed conquer all obstacles, and that sometimes the greatest courage was simply choosing to become who you were always meant to be. In the town of Copper Creek, many miles and lifetimes away, an old drunk named Morrison sometimes told wild tales about his daughter who had vanished into the desert. Most folks dismissed his stories as the ravings of a man pickled by rot-gut whiskey, but occasionally, travelers would report strange sightings in the deep wilderness: a bronze-skinned woman riding beside an Apache warrior, both of them moving with the fluid grace of creatures who belonged completely to the vast freedom of the untamed land. Some said they were spirits, others that they were outlaws, living beyond the reach of civilized law. But those who knew the old stories, who remembered the ancient wisdom that connected all living things, recognized them for what they truly were: proof that love and courage could indeed transform the world. One brave choice at a time, and in the hidden places of the desert, where the old spirits still danced and the ancient songs still echoed off stone walls, painted with the dreams of forgotten peoples. The story continued to unfold, a tale of love that transcended all boundaries, of freedom earned through courage, and of two souls who had found in each other the home they'd been seeking all their lives. The desert wind carried their laughter across the emptiness, and somewhere in the distance, the sacred valley sang its eternal song of hope and transformation. Waiting patiently for the next chapter of its endless story to begin,